Welcome to the channel, Scott's Garage HTX. Do not forget the HTX. I have two Okai scooters, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. Okai, the ES30 and the ES40. And I'm going to compare both of them and tell you what I think you should get by recommendation at the end of the video. Let's get to the geeky stuff first. Amp hours on the ES30 is 14.7. Amp hours on the ES40 is 15.3. 48 volts, 47 volts. This is all per their data sheet. This has a max power of 700 watts and a rated power of 350 watts versus 1,000 watts and 500 watts. The max gradient that you can go up a hill are both 25%. This can carry 220 pounds, this can carry 264 pounds. This has a max speed of 20 miles an hour and this has a max speed of stated 24 miles an hour. I've only been able to get it to go up to 22 miles an hour per its own speedometer. Maybe I should push myself away from the table a little bit more often. Also, the range, 50 miles versus 43 miles, and the weight, 46 pounds and 50 pounds on this one. So similar in weight. They're both on sale right now at their website. $600, $800. Let's get started. To begin with, these are very similar scooters, but they have some stark differences as well. Similarities, they both have a thumb-driven accelerator on the right hand and a left-hand brake. They're illuminated really, really nicely, quite honestly. Both have a brake light in the back. They're illuminated on the bottom with LED lights and illumination on the front with an LED light here as well. There's really no excuse for anybody not to see you on these scooters. They both have a light and a little bell to let you know you're coming. With the lights, there is a slight difference in these lights. This one's more of a round projection, it's a little bit brighter. This is a little bit rectangular projection, and it's not as bright. This has blinkers. Right here, it's on the left-hand driven as far as the selection. Pretty neat. I don't know if that's needed on a scooter, but quite honestly, they're there. Which leads us kind of into some of the more drastic differences between the two. This is front wheel driven, this is rear wheel driven. This has a rear disc brake, this has a front drum brake. And the biggest of all, this has suspension. The ES40 has suspension on it. Front and rear. And that will contribute to my comparison of the two. There's pluses and minuses to that, quite honestly. And we'll get into that. I'm going to start with the ES30. I'm going to start with an acceleration test from a dead stop. So I'm going to try to push off the same way on the ES42 when we get to the acceleration test. I have a little stopwatch on my phone. I'm going to start the stopwatch, push off, and see how long it takes us to get to 20 miles an hour. Let's go now. 10, 15, come on, get to 20, get to 20, get to 20. There we go. About 12 seconds. Seems pretty fair, not a big deal. Let's test the brakes. Remember, I put brand new brakes on this the other day and the brakes are excellent. One of the things that I do like about the ES30 is this. The ES30 has parts on it. On their website, you can get a tire, you can get brakes. You can actually fix this as it kind of wears through the items. Don't know how much you can get off the ES40. You have to go check that out. Maybe I could have checked that out between test rides. But this has decent acceleration, and the acceleration is linear. I can predict very well how fast and how much acceleration I want to give this at any given time, and it has a pretty decent, it's not regenerative braking, but the motor itself will slow it down at a decent pace. You don't have to overuse your brakes on this. Speaking of these brakes, the brakes are also linear. They don't grab. They're very smooth to the stop. They do not get you off kilter. They don't disrupt the scooter. And again, the acceleration is linear on this. The downside on this, let's get this on some uneven pavement, probably going out of the neighborhood. This does not have suspension on it, which is evident. It's a little rougher ride. My suggestion on this is, if you've got some differences between the sidewalk of 1 inch, if you're going on the sidewalk and you see something ahead of you that is a 1 inch or greater bump, abrupt bump between joints and concrete, slow down. Matter of fact, just stop. Go over that and then continue on, because it's really jarring, and I would think it's actually harming the scooter itself over time. I've already replaced the tire, the rear tire that is, on this once. I really happen to think it's because of that exact issue. Coming up to something that was repeatedly big jarring bumps. Immediate gradation changes in the concrete in the joints. Not bumps in per se, just rolling bumps, but where there's a joint in the concrete and one part of the concrete is higher than the other. That really jars this scooter. Another thing about this scooter, I can't control it with one arm. It has to be the arm with the accelerator on it per se, unless I want to slow down. But once you get your balance on this, it's really good. It turns very nicely. The turning itself, again, I'm going to use the word linear. It is very, very linear in the sense that it doesn't dive. You know what it's going to do, and that's a result of the suspension, or lack thereof the suspension. It is very predictable. It's going to do the same thing every turn, at least on flat ground. Maybe on something that's banked, it's going to do something different. But again, it's going to do the same thing on that bank every single time. And it's very predictable. So I like that. This overall is a great scooter. I use this for errands. I have had to get tires put on the truck. And I go to Costco and I just put it in the back of the truck and I come home. I've had to go get x-rays at the hospital. Yeah, well, that's another story. But the hospital's just down the street, and I've been able just to take this into, and nobody seems to care that I have a scooter inside their offices. There is one hitch that's developed on this scooter, and I do believe it's because of the lack of suspension. The jarring that you put this thing through on the city driving is the motor itself is glitching a bit every once in a while. You press on the accelerator and it stutters. The motor stutters. It throws you off balance a little bit. It kind of did it right there. I don't know if you can hear that. And I really do think that's from wear and tear on the scooter going over the city. Now, going over terrain on this, it's rated. You can go over terrain, say grass, hills, trails. It has more than enough capability to do that. It's a little jarring, but it works. And it doesn't have any problem with that. Overall, very convenient purchase. Now the ES40. Again, we're going to start with the acceleration test. 1, 2, 3, go. 10, 15. Actually, about the same. Maybe a half a second quicker. Given that its battery is about the same and it weighs a little bit more, it does have a little bit more power, but maybe that's offset by the weight. It's kind of expected. What's not expected on this is this throttle is not linear compared to the ES30. It is jerky, especially when you're just pushing off and you give it the throttle. I can modulate the throttle a little bit better on the ES30. This I cannot. It's not due to practice, it's just a different algorithm or setting to the throttle, and it does grab. It does take off fast. You would think it would accelerate faster, but it doesn't seem to do that. We can try another test and see if maybe I was the kind of user error. You know, let's try that real quick and see if maybe I can get a little bit faster on this, because the throttle is so much more responsive and, well, I call it jerky. All right, 1, 2, 3. $15. Yeah, same, about 12 seconds. So I can't really say anything different about that. The other thing that is not linear are the brakes. For one thing, they're front brakes, they're drum brakes. So when you hit the brakes with the suspension, the front of the scooter dives. And they're great brakes, don't get me wrong. It'll stop you. But it's not as a linear progression on the brakes as it is on the ES30. So that'll take some practice, quite honestly. If you're not experienced on riding the scooter and then you get into a situation right off the bat where you need to stop and you grab the brakes, I can see you coming off this thing in the front, because they do grab, and it takes a little bit of practice to modulate the brakes in a linear fashion. The other thing about this scooter is the steering. Again, it's not, well, and this has to do with the suspension, I think. It's not, I keep on using the word linear, it's not as predictable as the ES30. It'll dive more. It will, when you're going through a corner, it will cut in a little bit more aggressively or widen out a little bit more than the ES30, and that's going to do with the suspension. I think the best way to control that is just like on a motorcycle or anything else, especially dirt. Your body position can help you on this 100%. Also, things that can help you, well, these shocks. It is a smoother ride. It just is. The shocks are wonderful, honestly. They absorb bumps great. Much more comfortable ride. You're not worried as much as you are on the ES30 about the different changes in concrete and the joints. If you have got a rough joint in the concrete, you're not worried about that as much at all. And it just really handles it. But again, max speed for me on this right now is 21 miles an hour. There is a little bit of a headwind, so I'll give it a little bit of a break. But I've never been able to get above 22. But again, overall, excellent scooter. At least for me. I've seen people, I've gone down my street at the shop, 40 miles an hour in my car, and gotten passed by somebody on a scooter. I know they make faster ones. I get it. But I've come off on an ES30 at 20 miles an hour, and it freaking hurts. That concrete is not soft at all. But going through this like terrain, a yard, it's so much different than the ES30. The ES30 will jar you around. That handled that like a champ. So definitely pluses and minuses. About that suspension that I mentioned before, I do think it's the suspension that causes this to wallow a little bit in the steering and be a little bit more, I won't say unpredictable, but you have to modulate the brakes a little bit more with care than you would with the ES30, and that has to do with the front shock. I should add that both of these scooters have 3 riding modes. One's about walking speed, then a little bit more, maybe 10, 15 miles an hour, and then the full speed on each of these. Also, they are collapsible with the handlebars, so they can be transported easily in a car. Just remember, you have to be able to lift about 50 pounds. So which one? The ES30, quite honestly. For one thing, you can save a couple bucks right now by getting one online. The other issue is it's just the throttle on this one. What was the tipping point for me is when you come down to that crawl and you give it the throttle again to take off, this thing dies. It just doesn't have it, it just won't let you do it. Well, this one, you can go down to a crawl one mile. As long as you're going 1 mile an hour on this, you can hit the throttle and take off again. This one won't allow you to do that, and that's just the tipping point for me. You guys keep on keeping on. We'll catch you next time.